Rain fell like broken glass across the rooftops of the old Italian town, sharp, cold, and endless. Inside the centuries-old church of St. Lucia, the air smelled of wet stone and candle smoke. The pews were empty, the light dim, and only one soul remained. A girl sitting alone near the altar, her head bowed, her hands trembling over a rosary. Her name was Elena Moretti. She had run here through the storm, her shoes soaked, her heart splintered by words that wouldn't stop echoing in her mind. Words of betrayal, of loss, of something sacred slipping away. The rain outside drowned her sobs, but not the sound inside her, the ache that came from losing more than she could bear. The church was her only refuge. The world outside was cruel, but in here the silence listened. She lifted her head slightly. A tear rolled down her cheek, glistening in the flickering candlelight. The crucifix above the altar looked almost alive in the half-dark, the face of Christ bent in compassion as if watching her break. Her whisper trembled into the quiet. "Please, God, if you're still here, show me what to do. I've lost everything." Thunder rolled. The heavy doors of the church creaked open. Wind surged in, scattering droplets across the marble floor. Elena froze, her breath caught in her throat. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, soaked through, his coat dark with rain and something darker still. He carried something in his arms, a small bundle wrapped in white cloth, crying softly. For a heartbeat they just stared at each other, the broken girl and the man who looked like he'd crawled out of a storm made of sin. Before we begin this story, the narrator's voice whispers softly, "Tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let's begin." The man stepped forward slowly. His eyes were dark, too dark, and his jaw clenched tight, as if every word he wanted to say could hurt someone. Rain dripped from his hair, from his lashes, down onto the tiny child in his arms. The baby whimpered again. Elena stood, unsure if she should run or help, but when she saw how gently he held the infant, how his large hands cradled it as though it were made of glass, she stayed. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Come inside. It's cold." He said nothing, but his eyes flicked toward her, searching, testing. Then he crossed the threshold and the church doors slammed shut behind him with a hollow echo. The baby's cry filled the space between them. Elena's instincts took over. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "May I?" she asked, reaching her hands out. He hesitated, muscles tensing, but after a long pause he nodded. Carefully, he handed her the child. His hands lingered for a second, calloused, warm, trembling slightly. The baby quieted almost instantly in her arm. Elena smiled faintly through her tears. "Shears, it's all right. You're safe now." The man exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and pain. He turned away, removing his coat, revealing a shirt clinging to blood-stained skin. Elena's breath caught again. "You're hurt," she whispered. "It's not my blood," he said, his voice low, deep, a voice that carried both danger and despair. She looked down at the baby, a boy, tiny, fragile, with a small scar near his temple as if fate had already marked him. "Whose blood then?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the altar and sank onto the nearest pew, pressing his hands together, staring at the marble floor as though he were praying for something already lost. The candlelight danced across his face, sharp cheekbones, faint bruises, a scar that traced the corner of his mouth. He was beautiful in the way storms are beautiful, distant, uncontrollable, and bound to destroy whatever gets too close. "I had nowhere else to go," he murmured finally. "Then you came to the right place," Elena replied. "This church keeps its doors open for the lost." His gaze lifted, just enough to meet hers. "And what if the lost one has done unforgivable things?" She paused, rocking the baby gently. "Then maybe God sent him here anyway," she said, her voice trembling but true. The words seemed to pierce him. He looked away, jaw tight, a war flickering behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the altar beside a candle. "If I don't return by sunrise," he said quietly, "keep that safe." Her eyes flicked to it, then back to him. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He only looked at the child, long, tender, aching, and whispered something in Italian under his breath. "Perdonami, piccolo. Forgive me, little one." Then he turned toward the door. "Wait," Elena said, stepping forward. "At least tell me your name." He hesitated at the threshold, the rain spilling in again, thunder splitting the sky behind him. His voice, when it came, was quiet, raw. "Luca," he said. "Luca Ramon." The door closed, leaving the echo of his footsteps fading into the night. Elena stood there, the baby asleep in her arms, the note on the altar untouched. She looked up at the crucifix again, her heartbeat trembling between fear and something she didn't yet have a name for. Outside, the storm raged on, and inside the church, destiny had just begun to breathe. Morning crept slowly over the old town, pale and uncertain, as if afraid to disturb the silence that the night had left behind. Inside the church, the candles had burned down to stubs, their smoke curling like ghosts toward the ceiling. The baby stirred, whimpering softly in Elena's arm. She hadn't slept, not a moment, only sat by the altar through the long hours, whispering prayers she didn't know she still remembered. The folded note from the stranger, Luca Romano, still lay where he had left it. She had tried not to look at it, but its presence felt alive, as though it breathed with every flicker of light. Who was he? Why had he come here carrying a baby? And whose blood had stained his hands? Elena brushed a lock of hair from her eyes and looked down at the sleeping child. He was beautiful, delicate eyelashes, a small mouth twitching as if dreaming. He looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos that must have brought him here, but the faint scar near his temple still worried her. Whoever he was, he hadn't come from safety. She laid the baby gently in a wicker basket from the orphanage storage room, then turned toward the altar. Her fingers hesitated, trembling above the note. The air felt heavy, as though the church itself watched her. Finally, she picked it up and unfolded it. One, written in dark, hurried ink. Protect him, if I cannot. Alem. Below the message, a name had been written. Matteo Romano. Her heart tightened. So the child was his son. She read the note again, feeling its weight press into her chest. Something in those words, not just the fear but the finality, told her Luca hadn't expected to survive the night. Outside, the rain had eased to a soft drizzle. The town would wake soon. The bells would ring. The markets would open, and whispers would spread like wind. She couldn't let them find the baby here, not until she understood what was happening. She wrapped Matteo in a clean cloth, and held him close, his warmth soaking through her palms. His heartbeat was steady, a fragile rhythm of life she was suddenly responsible for. Hours later, Elena crossed the narrow cobbled street to the orphanage she helped run, a quiet, aging building beside the sea, run by Sister Maria and two other women. She slipped in through the back door, her dress still damp from the mist. Sister Maria looked up from the kitchen, startled. Elena, you've been gone all night. Dio mio, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Elena's voice shook. Not a ghost, sister. A man, and a child. The nun's expression softened as she stepped closer. A child. Elena unwrapped the baby gently. Sister Maria's lips parted in silent wonder. Where did he come from? Elena hesitated. He was left in the church. His father brought him. He didn't say much, just that I should protect the boy if he couldn't. Sister Maria frowned. And this father, who is he? I don't know, Elena lied, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't stay. It wasn't the full truth, but something inside her, instinct perhaps, warned her to keep Luca's name hidden. There was danger in that name. You could feel it just by saying it. The nun sighed, touching the baby's head. Poor little soul. We'll care for him, of course. But Elena, her gaze lingered, knowing and sad. You look frightened. Is there something you're not telling me? Elena lowered her eye. Only that he seemed lost, as if the world had already judged him. Sister Maria smiled faintly. Then he came to the right place. She couldn't shake the memory of Luca's eyes, dark, desperate, and full of something he couldn't say aloud, the kind of pain that comes from a life lived too long in shadows. She thought of his question, what if the lost one has done unforgivable things? And her own answer, then maybe God sent him here anyway. She didn't know why she'd said it, only that she'd meant it, maybe because she'd seen the flicker of something good in him, beneath all the darkness. A man who could have been anyone, sinner, savior, or both. Her eyes drifted toward the cradle by the window. Matteo slept peacefully, the moonlight tracing a silver halo around his small form. She leaned closer and whispered, your father will come back for you, I can feel. But even as she said it, her heart trembled, because she didn't know if it was hope or fear speaking. That same night, miles away in an abandoned villa overlooking the sea, Luca Romano sat in the dark with blood drying on his knuckles and rain seeping through the broken ceiling. He held a gun in one hand, and a silver pendant in the other, the pendant that belonged to Matteo's mother. He placed it on the table beside an old photograph. Her face smiled up at him, ghost-like from another time. He whispered to the empty room, he's safe now. I did what I could. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Elena, the girl in the church, with her trembling hands and fearless voice. He had meant to disappear from her life, but something about her had followed him into the silence. Back in the orphanage, a sudden crash of thunder startled the baby awake. He cried loud and piercing, echoing through the stone hallways. Elena rushed to him, her arms wrapping around his tiny frame. She rocked him gently, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing when storms came too close. Through the window, lightning flashed, for a moment illuminating the cliffs across the bay, and though she didn't know it, someone was standing there watching. A figure cloaked in shadow, his coat billowing in the wind, watching the faint light of her window, as if it were the only light left in his world. In the silence between the thunder and the rain, two lost souls remained bound by a child, and by a promise neither yet understood. The story had only just begun. Morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made the sea look almost silver. The rain had passed, leaving the streets slick and quiet. From the orphanage balcony, Elena watched fishermen haul in their nets, their voices carrying faintly through them. Everything seemed normal again, but it wasn't, because beneath the calm, whispers had already begun to spread. By midday, the town's narrow alleys hummed with murmurs. A stranger in the night, a man soaked in blood, a baby left in the No one knew the full story, but everyone pretended they did. The Mafia, said the grocer to a customer near the square. Another runaway girl, said someone else. Or maybe, whispered the old caretaker of the church. The child was born of sin. Elena heard it all, every word, and with each rumor her heart ached a little more, not for herself, but for the baby asleep in her care, and for the man whose eyes had carried so much quiet ruin. That afternoon she sat by the orphanage window, with Matteo in her arms, the sea wind playing with the curtain lace. The baby had begun to smile now, soft and unexpected, the kind of smile that heals without asking permission. She traced her finger over his tiny hand. You don't know it yet, she whispered, but the world will talk about you before it ever knows you. Behind her, Sister Maria entered, holding a folded newspaper. Elena, she said gently, you should see this. Elena set Matteo down and took the paper. Her eyes scanned the front page, and then froze. There he was, Luca Romano, a photograph, grainy and harsh under the headline, Mafia leader disappears after night of violence, infant and caregiver missing. Elena's breath caught. The article spoke of fire, of gunmen, of the Romano crime family collapsing after a brutal ambush. It mentioned a woman, unnamed, found dead in a warehouse near the coast. The final line made her blood run cold. Romano's son, believed to be only 6 months old, is missing. Sister Maria's voice softened. You know what this means, don't you? Elena's hands trembled around the newspaper. It means, they'll come looking. She avoided the church, avoided the markets, even avoided the mirror because every time she saw her reflection, she saw fear staring back. But fate, as always, had a way of finding those who tried to hide from it. One evening, while she was tending to the laundry behind the orphanage, a man approached through the fog. His suit was sharp, his shoes spotless, and his eyes carried the same cold calculation she had seen once before, the kind that measures everything, even people. Miss Moretti asked, his tone courteous but wrong in some invisible way. Elena turned slowly. Yes, I work for the Romano family, he said. We're trying to locate a missing child. I was told you were in the church that night. Her heart pounded. She forced a small nod. There were many people in the church. Ah, he smiled thinly, but only one woman stayed till morning. The wind howled between them, the sea crashed against the cliffs below. Elena swallowed hard, clutching the damp linen in her hands. What do you want from me? To know if you saw anything, he said. Or anyone. Her pulse raced. Matteo's faint cry drifted from the open window above, soft, almost imperceptible, but the man's head tilted slightly. He had heard. Who's that? He asked, stepping closer. My nephew, she lied quickly. He's ill. The man's gaze lingered on her face for a moment too long. Then, with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said, if you happen to remember anything, Miss Moretti, call this number. He handed her a small Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the fog. That night, Elena locked every door. The storm had returned, and the sound of rain on the roof felt louder than before. Matteo whimpered in his crib, and she sat beside him singing softly to drown out the wind. She thought of Luca, where he was, if he was still alive, if he knew men were already searching for his son. She imagined him standing somewhere in the dark, his coat torn, his hands still shaking from the night he left the baby in her arms, and she imagined what it would mean if he didn't survive. Her gaze drifted toward the folded note she had kept hidden beneath her pillow. "Protect him if I cannot." She read it again, tracing the ink with her fingertip. The words had become her vow. The next morning she returned to the church. The air was still damp, heavy with incense and memory. She knelt before the same altar where she had first met him. For a long time she said nothing. She didn't know what to pray for anymore. At last she whispered, "If he's alive, let him find his way back. And if he's gone, let me be strong enough to keep my promise." When she rose to leave, she noticed something she hadn't before, a second piece of paper tucked beneath the same candle where his note had been. Her heartbeat stumbled as she pulled it free. It wasn't new, the edges were damp, the ink slightly smudged, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "Don't trust anyone from my world, especially the ones who call themselves family. Elaine." Her hands trembled. She looked around the empty church, the silent pews, the rain streaking the windows. He had been here again, Luca. A mix of fear and relief flooded her chest. He was alive, watching, protect. She stepped outside, the wind tugging at her shawl, her eyes scanning the street, the rooftops, the shadows between the lamps. But there was nothing, only the whisper of the sea, and the faint tolling of the church bell that seemed to say, "He's closer than you think." That night, across the bay, Luca stood on the cliffs again, his coat soaked, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of the orphanage. He had come back, but not to be seen, not yet. He couldn't afford to. The world was already moving against him, and the only thing standing between his enemies and his son was her. The sun returned at last, spilling its light across the sleepy town, but it did nothing to chase away the weight that had settled inside Elena Moretti's heart. Each morning she woke to the same sounds, seagulls calling over the water, church bells echoing down the cobblestone streets, the baby's soft breathing beside her, and yet she felt suspended in a world that wasn't quite hers anymore. Every day felt borrowed. The rumors still lingered like ghosts in the markets and alleys. People spoke of Luca Romano's empire collapsing, of betrayals, of disappearances. No one dared to speak his name too loud. But for Elena, that name had already taken root inside her like a prayer she didn't know how to stop saying. She lived now between fear and faith, caring for Matteo as though he were her own, hiding him beneath the quiet life of the orphanage, pretending everything was normal while every instinct told her the storm was only sleeping. Far across the bay, where the cliffs rose high above the town, Luca Romano had found his refuge, a crumbling villa surrounded by wild rosemary and wind-torn olive trees. The sea below struck the rocks with endless fury as if the ocean itself knew the sins the house was trying to hide. He sat by the cracked window, his shoulder still bandaged, a half-burned cigarette trembling between his fingers. Below him, the world continued as if nothing had changed, but everything. He was no longer the man who commanded rooms with silence, who made enemies tremble just by walking through a door. That man had died the night he walked into the church. What remained was a father and a fugitive haunted by the memory of a woman's voice saying, "Then maybe God sent him here anyway." He hadn't prayed in years, but he thought of her every night, her face in candlelight, her hands steady even when she was afraid. He wondered what she was doing now, if she'd kept her promise, if the boy still smiled, if she'd already forgotten him. The path wound upward until the church's bell tower became a distant dot behind her. The wind tangled her hair, carrying the smell of salt and rain. Matteo laughed as she lifted him higher, pointing toward the sea. "You like the ocean, don't you?" "Maybe your father loved it too." She said it softly, unsure whether it was true, or if she simply wanted to believe he'd loved something pure once. From far above, hidden behind the window of the abandoned villa, Luca saw them. He froze. Elena's dress fluttered in the wind, sunlight catching her hair, turning it into threads of gold. Matteo squirmed in her arms, laughing, a sound that hit Luca like a memory he'd tried to bury. For the first time in months, his eyes softened. He had sworn never to go near them again. But watching them from the distance, something cracked inside him. He wanted to thank her, to tell her she'd saved what little good was left in him, but his world wasn't finished with him yet. That evening, 2 cars arrived at the villa, sleek, black, uninvited. Luca recognized the men before they even stepped out, his old associates, the last ghosts of the Romano family. He waited for them in the courtyard, the sea roaring behind him. "Luca," said the first man, lighting a cigarette, "you've been hard to find." "I wasn't hiding," Luca replied coldly, "just waiting to see who'd come first, the cops or the traitors." The man smirked. "Neither, apparently. We came with news. The council has chosen your replacement. You're done." "I was done the night you all sold me out," Luca said.
The man shrugged. Maybe, but you should know. They're still looking for the boy. The heir. Word is, he's alive. Luca's muscles tensed. What did you say? The kid. Your son. Someone saw a woman with him near the orphanage. Luca's voice dropped to a growl. If any of you go near them, relax. The man interrupted, smirking. No one's touching them yet. But you might want to disappear for good, Romano, because when they find out the child lives, they'll burn every inch of that town to find him. The wind rose, carrying the man's words away, but Luca's mind was already elsewhere. The church, the orphanage, Elena's face in the rain. By the time the cars left, the villa was silent again. Luca stood at the window long after the engines faded, his jaw clenched. He'd promised himself he wouldn't go back, that his presence would only bring danger, but some promises were made to be broken. She told herself it was the wind, but something inside her, that same instinct that had once kept her alive, whispered no. She lit a small candle and crossed the courtyard barefoot, the gravel cold beneath her feet. The church was empty, dimly lit by the dying glow of votive candles. The smell of wax and old wood filled the air. Then she saw it. Another note, this time pinned to the pew where she had once cried. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. He's coming for the boy. Keep him hidden. I'll end this before it reaches you. Alun. Her breath trembled. She turned toward the doors, half expecting to see him standing there, but there was only silence, only the rain beginning to fall again. Miles away, on the same cliff, Luca loaded his pistol and whispered to the night, I'll burn the world before I let them touch her. And as thunder rolled once more over the sea, the first light of war began to flicker in his eyes. The town was wrapped in the soft light of early evening, that moment between gold and gray, when the world holds its breath before night began. But to Elena it felt like the air itself was trembling. She could feel it, something shifting, drawing nearer. For days, she had sensed it in the silence, in the flicker of shadows outside the orphanage window, in the unease that seemed to haunt the corners of her heart. And that evening, as the sun sank into the sea, he returned. Amano, the bells of St. Lucia tolled 6 times. Elena stood in the church alone, arranging candles before the altar. The air smelled faintly of lilies and smoke, and Matteo's laughter drifted faintly from the nursery down the hall. She smiled, until the door creaked open. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Her hands froze. The flame she'd been lighting wavered, shrinking into a thin thread of smoke. Then she heard it, slow footsteps echoing through the marble hall. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway. Luca Romano. He looked different now, older, warier, the sharpness of his face, shadowed by exhaustion. His coat was damp with rain again, his hair slightly longer, a small scar visible near his temple, but his eyes were the same, dark and unreadable, yet burning with something only she could recognize. The quiet storm of a man who'd carried too much alone. Luca, she whispered, barely believing he was real. He didn't move at first. For a moment the church seemed to hold the breath between them, that impossible distance between what had been lost, and what had found its way back. Finally he spoke. You kept him alive. It wasn't a question. It was relief wrapped in disbelief. A confession and a Elena nodded, her voice trembling. He's safe. He's healthy. I didn't know if you were dead. His lips lifted faintly, bitterly. I thought so too. He stepped closer, his boots echoing against the marble.
The candlelight caught on his face. There were bruises fading along his jaw, a healed wound on his shoulder, and beneath the darkness, something softer glimmered for just a second. Matteo's cry pierced the silence from the nursery. Elena turned instinctively. Luca froze, his eyes softening at the sound, that small, innocent voice that carried everything he'd ever done, and everything he still hoped to undo. May I see him? He asked quietly. Elena hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. She led him down the narrow corridor, her pulse loud in her ears. The nursery smelled of soap and warm milk, a fragile world untouched by the violence that lived beyond its walls. Matteo lay awake, babbling softly to the ceiling, but when Luca leaned over the crib, the baby stilled, as if recognizing something older than memory. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Luca reached out, his large hand trembling as it brushed the child's tiny fingers. Matteo grasped one instantly, holding on tight. A sound escaped Luca's throat, rough, broken, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He remembers, Elena whispered. No, Luca murmured, eyes shining. He forgives. Elena studied him, the man who had vanished like a storm and returned like a ghost. You shouldn't have come, she said softly. They're still looking for you. I know. His voice was low, steady, but they're looking for him too. Her eyes flicked to the doorway, to where Matteo slept peacefully. You said you'd end it, that you'd keep him safe. I'm trying. He met her gaze. But I need to know, did anyone come here? Anyone asking questions? Elena hesitated. Yes. Said he worked for your family. Luca's expression darkened instantly. Describe him. Tall, dark hair, expensive suit, cold eyes. Luca cursed under his breath. That's Enzo Ricci. He was my brother's lieutenant before they betrayed us. He looked toward the door, jaw tight. If he found you, it means the council knows the boy is alive. Her heart stuttered. Then what do we do? Luca's hand brushed through his hair, his mind racing. You stay hidden. Don't go to town. Don't trust anyone, not even the nuns. I'll handle them. And she asked quietly, where will you go? He looked at her, really looked at her, the way a drowning man might look at the surface he'll never reach. I go where they bleed, he said, because they won't stop until one of us is gone. Night descended again, heavy and full of rain. Luca stayed in the church's back room, cleaning his wound in silence while Elena prepared tea by the small fire. Every so often, he glanced at her quiet movements, her bare hands trembling slightly, as she poured the water. It was strange, he thought, how the sight of her doing something so ordinary could undo him more than any bullet ever had. She handed him the cup, sitting across from him. The firelight flickered between them, drawing faint reflections in their eyes. Why me? She asked soft. Out of everyone in this town, why bring him to me? He stared at the flames for a moment before answering. Because you looked at me without fear. She blinked. You think that's rare? In my world, he said, it's The thunder rolled again. Lightning flashed. And for a brief second, Elena saw the exhaustion break across his face. The weight of guilt, loss, and something deeper that he didn't dare name. You can't keep carrying all of it alone, she whispered. You'll drown. He smiled faintly. Maybe drowning's the only thing that keeps me from burning. Silence stretched between them, soft, fragile, magnetic, and then, almost without meaning to, she reached out and touched his hand. It was rough, scarred, trembling under her touch, but he didn't pull away. The storm outside cracked like glass, and for one impossible heartbeat, they sat like that, a sinner and a saint, both too human to let go. I go, but peace never stays long for men like Luca. Somewhere beyond the hills, engines roared, 2 black cars cutting through the rain toward the town. Their headlights sliced the night apart. In less than an hour, the church would no longer be a refuge. It would be a battlefield. And as the first raindrops fell again against the stained glass windows, Luca whispered under his breath, whatever happens next, she'll never face it alone. The storm had returned by midnight, low, heavy, and relentless. Rain struck the church roof like the ticking of an anxious clock. The candles flickered as though they too were afraid of what was coming. In the small back room behind the altar, Elena sat beside the fire, holding Matteo close to her chest. He had fallen asleep again, his small hand curled against her heart. Across from her, Luca stood near the window, his body tense, his shadow long and broken across the stone wall. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour, but silence was safer than truth. Outside, thunder rolled like distant gunfire. Luca's eyes stayed on the window, the reflection of the flame shimmering across his scarred knuckles. He had returned to protect them, yet every moment he spent here felt like tempting fate. He wasn't meant to belong to this quiet. He wasn't meant to stand beside a woman like her. He turned toward Elena at last. You should sleep. I'll watch the door. Elena looked up, tired but steady. You haven't slept either. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eye. I learned a long time ago that sleep is a luxury for honest men. Then maybe you should try being one, she said softly, and immediately looked down, regretting the sharpness in her voice. But Luca didn't get angry. Instead, he walked toward her, stopping just close enough that the firelight painted their faces in gold and shadow. You think I haven't tried, he murmured. Elena met his gaze. I think you've forgotten how. He stared at her for a long, still moment. The sound of rain filled the space between them. Finally, he knelt beside her, resting his forearms on his knees. You don't know what I've done. Then tell me. He laughed once dryly. You wouldn't want to hear it. Maybe I should, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Because you keep saying you're not worth saving, and yet you keep saving everyone else. Her words landed like a confession. Luca exhaled slowly. You don't understand, Elena. There's blood on my hands that'll never wash away. I killed men. Some who deserved it. Some who did. I lied. I burned bridges. I destroyed people I loved, just to keep my empire standing. He looked toward the sleeping baby. And when I finally stopped, when I thought I could start over, they killed her. Elena's breath caught. Matteo's mother. He nodded once, jaw tightening. Her name was Isabella. We weren't married. She was just light, the only light I ever had in that darkness. When the council thought she'd make me weak, they took her. He looked down at his hands, his voice breaking. She died because she loved me. I can't undo that. Elena reached out slowly, her hand hovering before it touched his. And yet, you still came back for your son. You still carried him here. That's not the act of a monster, Luca. He met her eyes and for a moment, the mask slipped. He wasn't the Mafia boss, not the legend whispered about in alleyways. He was just a man, raw, fractured human. I didn't come here for forgiveness, he said quietly. I came because I couldn't let them have him. I don't deserve peace, Elena, but he does. And you, his voice faltered, you make me forget what I am. Because, a log cracked in the fireplace. The light shifted, warm, flickering, intimate. Elena looked at him, her heart aching in ways she couldn't name. Every instinct told her to keep her distance, yet something deeper, older, pulled her close. You're not what you think, she whispered. You've just been lost too long. He stared at her, torn between belief and self-doubt. Then he reached up hesitantly, as if the gesture itself might burn him, and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. Elena, he said softly, her name breaking in his mouth like a secret. I don't know how to be near you without ruining everything. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. Then ruin everything. Just don't keep running. The air between them stilled, fragile, electric. The storm outside faded to a whisper, as though the world itself was listening. For one heartbeat, their foreheads nearly touched. The warmth of the fire wrapped around them. His breath trembled near her cheek, and she could feel his restraint, heavy, aching, beautiful in its hesitation. Then, Matteo stirred, breaking the spell. The baby whimpered, reminding them both of the world beyond this fragile stillness. Elena drew back gently, her voice soft but firm. You should rest, Luca. He exhaled, eyes lowering. If I close my eyes, I'll see her. Then see her, she said. And remember you're still alive. Because, later that night, when she finally fell asleep on the chair beside Matteo's crib, Luca watched her in the candlelight. The flickering flame painted her face in gold and shadow, her lashes resting on her cheeks. Her lips parted slightly as she breathed. He thought about how strange it was that peace could exist in a world like his, and that it could take the shape of a woman like her. He reached for the folded note she had once kept hidden. Protect him if I cannot. He smiled faintly. Looks like you kept your promise. But as he looked toward the window, his smile faded. Far down the hill, in the darkness beyond the town, faint lights moved. 2 cars, slow, deliberate, heading toward the church. He stood up silently, his hand reaching for the gun beneath his coat. They've found us, he whispered to himself. He turned back to the sleeping woman, his voice a ghost of tenderness. I won't let them touch you. Then he blew out the candle. The rain came harder than it had in weeks, drumming against the stained glass, whispering along the roof like a warning. Inside the church, Elena stirred awake to the faint sound of footsteps. Not Matteo's cries, not thunder, footsteps. Slow, careful, too careful. She opened her eyes. The fire had died down to embers. The candlelight had vanished. Across the room, the door was open a sliver. Luca, she whispered. No answer. Then she heard it again, the faint metallic click of a gun being loaded. Her pulse began to. She stood quickly, scooping Matteo into her arms and wrapping him in a blanket. Her bare feet moved silently across the stone floor. Through the doorway, she could see Luca, half in shadow, half in the pale light from the window, crouched near the entrance, his pistol drawn, his eyes cold and sharp. When he noticed her, he raised one finger to his lips. Don't make a sound. Elena froze, clutching the child to her chest. The storm outside roared louder, as though trying to drown out what was about to come. Because. Then came the headlights. 2, then 4, sweeping across the walls as the cars stopped outside. Doors opened. Boots splashed through voices, low, rough, speaking in clipped Italian. Spread out, check the hall. Luca whispered under his breath. They came faster than I thought. Who are they? Elena whispered. He turned, eyes hard. Men who think my son is their ticket to power. A gunshot cracked through the night. The sound shattered the silence like glass. Luca shoved the table aside, motioning for her to get down. Back room, now. Elena stumbled toward the side door, heart hammering. The baby whimpered. She kissed his forehead, whispering prayers she didn't remember learning. Behind her the church door burst open, wood splintering under force. A voice echoed through the nave, "Luca Romano, come out, and we might let them live." Luca's reply was a whisper to Elena, "Not them. Go. Don't stop till you reach the cliffs." "What about you?" He looked at her, rainwater streaking down his face from the broken window. "I started this fire, I'll end it." She wanted to argue, to say something, but his gaze silenced her, that unspoken plea between those who know time has already run out. She slipped through the corridor, her breath shallow, her arms wrapped tight around the child. Behind her, the first shots rang out, bullets smashing through stained glass, candles toppling, colors scattering like rainbows into the dark. The church became a storm within a storm. Luca moved like a phantom, one with the thunder, his silhouette flashing in and out of the lightning that bled through shattered windows. He fired once, twice, precise, deliberate. 2 men fell before they could even call out, but more came, always. He ducked behind a pew, blood trickling from a graze across his arm. The smell of gunpowder mixed with incense and rain. He could still hear the faint cries of Matteo somewhere down the corridor, and it gave him strength he didn't think he had left. Another voice shouted, "You can't protect them both, Romano. The council wants the boy alive, you're expendable." Luca rose, eyes burning. "They'll have to kill God first." He moved with deadly grace, the old instincts taking over, though every step cost him more. The marble floor was slick with rain and blood. The candles flickered, shadows danced, and every heartbeat felt like a countdown. Meanwhile, Elena pushed open the old wooden door that led to the rear courtyard. The rain hit her face like shards of glass. She ran barefoot through the mud, Matteo crying softly in her arms. Her breath came in gasps, her dress clinging to her skin, her hair plastered against her face. Behind her, the church glowed faintly, flashes of gunfire lighting its stained windows like lightning from within. She turned once, just once, and saw Luca standing in the doorway, his gun raised, protecting her even as the world fell apart around him. Then another shot echoed. He staggered. Her scream was swallowed by thunder. The pain seared like fire, but he gritted his teeth and rose again. One last man approached from the shadows, weapon drawn. Enzo Ricci himself, smiling that cruel, polished smile. "Romano," he said, stepping over the fallen, "always the martyr. You could have joined me. We could have ruled what was left." Luca's breath came ragged. "I'm done ruling graves." Enzo laughed, raising his pistol. "Then you'll die with them." A shot rang out. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Enzo's smirk faded. He looked down, a red bloom spreading across his chest, and fell. Luca dropped his weapon, blood dripping from his fingers. He could barely stand, but he turned toward the back door, toward the storm, toward the woman and child disappearing into the rain. Elena reached the cliffside path, the wind howling against her, her lungs burning. She turned when she heard him call her name. "Elena." She froze. Through the rain, she saw him stumbling, bleeding, soaked in shadow yet still coming for. He reached her, falling to his knees in front of her, gasping. "You're hurt," she cried, tears mixing with the storm. He shook his head, voice trembling. "It's nothing. They're gone now. They won't touch you." She knelt beside him, pressing her hands against his wound, desperate. "You need a doctor." He caught her wrist gently, his hand cold, his eyes soft. "If I die tonight," he whispered, "remember I saw heaven in your eyes." Her breath broke. Don't say that." He smiled weakly. "Then stay with me, just a little longer." Thunder rumbled overhead. The sea crashed below. The whole world seemed to hold its breath as she leaned her forehead against his. Their tears and rain and blood all one. And when she finally whispered, "You'll live, Luke. You have to." He closed his eyes, not in surrender but in faith. The Kazan crept slow and pale over the coast. The fires in the church burned low, leaving smoke curling into the gray sky. The police would come soon. The world would wake and find the aftermath of sins and prayers colliding. But for now, in the quiet between waves, Elena sat on the hill, holding Matteo close, and watched as Luca finally drifted into sleep beside her. Alive, barely, but alive. For the first time in years, he looked peaceful. The morning light was thin and gray, a weary kind of dawn that seemed unsure whether to rise at all. The rain had passed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of smoke and salt. The once proud church of St. Lucia stood wounded, its roof blackened by fire, its stained glass shattered like the memory of a dream. And among the ruins, Elena Moretti waited. She sat beside Luca, his head resting in her lap, his breath shallow but steady. His shirt was soaked in blood, and every few minutes she pressed her hand against his wound,
whispering prayers into the wind that swept across the cliffs. Her tears had run out hours ago, now there was only determination. She had saved him once from the darkness of his world, now she would save him again from death itself. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, Luca, stay." His eyes flickered open at the sound of her voice, dark, dazed, unfocused. "Elena," he murmured, each syllable a string. Where's Matteo?" She smiled through trembling lips. "Safe, with Sister Maria. You saved him." A small broken laugh escaped his chest. "Then, I can rest." "No," she said sharply. "You can't. Not yet." He blinked up at her dazed. "You're stubborn." "Someone has to be," she replied. "You've been running your whole life. Let me be the one who stays." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the waves crashing below them, the morning wind tugging at her hair. There was something sacred in the stillness, something that felt like both an ending and a beginning, the kinning. By noon, Sister Maria had found them with the help of 2 fishermen. Luca was unconscious again, his pulse faint but present. They carried him to the orphanage's cellar, the safest place left, hidden beneath stone and candlelight. The nuns worked in silence, their movements practiced, solemn. They stitched his wound, washed away the blood, prayed over him when his breathing faltered. Elena stayed beside him the entire time. She didn't eat, didn't rest, didn't speak unless it was to whisper his name, as though saying it could keep him tethered to the world. When at last the worst was over, Sister Maria pulled her aside. "Elena," she said gently, "you've risked everything. The police are already asking questions. The church fire, the bodies. If they find him here, they won't." Elena interrupted. "I'll keep him hidden, even if it means losing everything." Elena met her eye. "He's already lost everything. If I turn away now, I'm no better than the world that broke him." The nun sighed, pressing a hand to her cheek. "Your heart is brave, child, but brave hearts often break the hardest." Luca drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by fever dreams. Sometimes he mumbled names. Isabella, Matteo, Enzo. Other times, nothing at all. Elena tended to him quietly, washing his wounds, reading softly from the Psalms when the fever rose too high. She could feel the shift between them, something fragile and unspoken blooming beneath the fear and the blood. He wasn't the man who had once terrified the city. Here, stripped of power, he was just Luca, the man who flinched at thunder, who whispered apologies in his sleep. One night, while the rain returned in soft whispers, he woke with a gasp. "Elena," he rasped, "I need to tell you something." She set down the bowl of water, leaning close. "You should rest." "No," he said, shaking his head weakly. "You deserve to." He struggled to sit up. She helped him, her hands steady despite her heart pounding. His voice was low, rough, but clear enough to carve through the air. "I didn't just kill to survive," he began. "I killed to build something. Power, fear, a kingdom made of. I told myself it was to protect Matteo, to give him a future, but the truth is, I did it because I didn't believe I could be anything else." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. "When Isabella died," he continued, "I wanted to burn the world. I went after the men who took her. I didn't care who I became. But that night, the night I found you in the church, something stopped me. You looked at me like I wasn't beyond saving. I didn't understand it then. I think I still don't. But that look, it changed me." He turned his head toward her, voice breaking. "I don't know how to live in your world, Elena, but if there's any part of me left that can be forgiven, I want to try." She reached out and took his hand, warm now, alive. "You don't need to be forgiven, Luke. You just need to stop running from the light." He exhaled, eyes closing. "And if the light burns, then let it burn away everything that hurt you." But peace, as always, was brief. But 2 days later, news spread across the town. The police had found the bodies in the church. Whispers turned into headlines, and Luca Romano's name was once again painted in black ink across every newspaper. A warrant was issued. His face, the face Elena had learned to see past, now stared from posters hung in the market square. Sister Maria entered the cellar with trembling hands. "They're coming, Elena," she said. "You need to leave tonight." Elena turned to Luca, who had regained enough strength to stand, though his body was still fragile. "You heard her," she said. "They'll find you." He looked at her, quiet and unreadable. "And you, I'm not leaving you." "Elena," he said softly, taking her hand, "if they catch you with me, they'll take Matteo, they'll destroy everything you built. I can't let that happen." Then what do you expect me to do? Let you die out there alone? He smiled faintly, brushing her knuckles with his thumb. You won't lose me. You'll just have to wait a little longer. Her eyes filled with tears. Don't ask me to. He didn't answer. He just leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. For a moment, the world disappeared. No sirens, no danger, just breath, warmth, and something that felt like home. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper meant only for her. Tell him, tell Matteo his father was trying to be a better man. Before she could stop him, he was gone, disappearing into the storm one last time. That night, as she held Matteo close, and listened to the police cars wailing through the valley, Elena knelt before the altar of the ruined church, and whispered through her tears, "Forgive him, Lord," because he already forgave himself. Outside, the sea raged, the world hunted him. But in the quiet between heartbeats, Elena felt a strange certainty that somewhere out there, Luca Romano was still alive, and that love, no matter how impossible, had already begun to change them both. Autumn came early that year. The sea turned darker, colder, and the winds from the cliffs carried a melancholy that settled into every stone of the town. The church had been sealed, its doors barred, its windows boarded, its scent of smoke and sorrow left to fade with time. But to Elena, it remained alive. Every creak of the wind sounded like his footsteps. Every echo was his voice. It had been 3 months since Luca Romano vanished into the storm. 3 months of silence, of unanswered prayers, of waiting for something she could no longer name. She still kept his note, "Protect him if I cannot," folded neatly inside her Bible. Sometimes, when Matteo slept, she would take it out and trace her thumb across the ink, as though the texture could somehow bridge the distance between them. And then she began to write. The first letter came quietly, without plan. She sat at her small wooden desk one evening, candlelight trembling beside her, and began to speak to the page as if it were him. "Luca, it's raining again. The town smells of the sea, and every time I hear thunder, I remember that night. Matteo is growing fast. He smiles when I say your name, maybe because he can still feel you somehow. I tell him you're away fixing the world, though I don't know if that's true, but I believe it is. I hope wherever you are you've found a little peace, or at least a place where the noise stops." She sealed the letter, not intending to send it, but once she started, she couldn't stop. Every week, another, sometimes long, sometimes short, sometimes filled with stories about Matteo learning to walk, sometimes confessions about her own sleepless nights, her doubts, her aching hope. "Do you still look for us when the night is quiet? Are you still bleeding from the places no one can see? If I ever see you again, I'll ask you to stop saving the world and just come home." She kept them all in a small tin box under her bed, the letters of a woman writing to a ghost, who still had a heartbeat somewhere beyond the horizon. Elena stood by the orphanage window, holding Matteo, watching the white flakes fall softly across the sea. He giggled, reaching for them as though the sky were offering him tiny gifts. "You like that, don't you?" she whispered. "Your father would have laughed too." She hadn't cried in weeks, but that day the tears came unbidden. Quiet, gentle tears, the kind that fall when the heart stops fighting them. She whispered to the glass, "Come back, Luca, just once, even if it's only to say goodbye." A month later fate answered, not with Luca, but with a stranger. It was evening and the orphanage was quiet. Elena was reading to the children when the doorbell rang. Sister Maria answered first, and moments later, a man stepped inside, tall, rugged, the kind of man whose presence seemed to pull the warmth out of the room. He wore a worn leather coat, the smell of smoke and travel still clinging to him. "Miss Moretti?" he asked. Elena looked up sharply. "Yes." The man hesitated, then removed his hat. "My name's Marco De Luca. I worked for him once." The world seemed to tilt. She stood slowly, every nerve alert. "Him? You mean?" He nodded. "Luca Romano." Her hands trembled. "Is alive," Marco said quickly. "For now." Her knees nearly gave out. "Where is he?" Marco's gaze lowered. "You should know he's been moving constantly. North. Mostly. The council's fallen apart, but there are still men hunting him. He's kept his distance to keep you safe." But, he reached into his coat and pulled out something. A worn envelope, the edges soft from travel. "He wanted you to have this. Said he wrote it months ago." Elena took it with shaking hands, the paper already damp with her tear. "Elena, if this letter reaches you, it means I'm still somewhere between running and remembering. I've lost track of days, but not of you. There are nights I still wake to the sound of Matteo crying, only to realize it's just my own heart making noise. I've done what I can to burn my past away. The men who wanted him, they're gone now. But so is the man I was. What's left of me is yours. If the world ever lets us meet again, let's. She pressed the letter to her lips, her shoulders shaking. He's alive, she whispered. He's still alive. Marco nodded. He's alive but barely. I left him 2 towns north. He said he'd come back when it was safe. Then his voice softened. But there's something else, Miss Moretti. He reached into his coat again and pulled out the small tin box. Her tin box. The one that held all the letters she had never sent. Her breath caught. How? He found them, Marco said. He'd been watching the orphanage for months. Said reading them was the only thing keeping him alive. Elena's tears fell freely now, her hands covering her mouth. She could barely breathe through the ache in her chest. He read them, she whispered. Marco nodded. Every word. He said if he didn't make it back he wanted you to know. He did try to find peace. The letters, hers and his, lay spread out before the flames, the candlelight trembling over the ink like memory come alive. She read them all again, every confession, every hope, every word that had crossed the silence between them. And when she finished, she looked toward the window, toward the dark sea that separated her from him, and whispered through her tears, "You found my words. So find me now." Outside, the wind carried her whisper into the night, across the cliffs, the fields, the broken roads, toward a man who was already walking back through the darkness, following the only light he'd ever known. The snow melted quickly that spring, washing the town clean of its silence.
But for Elena Moretti, the thaw brought no peace. Every morning she woke to the same ache, a question that lived in the quiet corners of her soul. Was Luca still out there? The world said he was gone. The police said he was a fugitive. But her heart said something different, that he was still moving through the world somewhere, still breathing, still trying to make the impossible choice between love and duty. And somewhere, far north along the borderlands of Italy, Luca Romano was doing exactly that. He'd been hiding in an abandoned vineyard, a forgotten stretch of land, where frost still clung to the vines and the crows outnumbered the living. His body had healed, but his heart hadn't. Each day he woke to the same sound, not the sea, not the wind, but the echo of her voice saying, "Then let it burn away everything that hurt you." He'd tried to do just that. He'd dismantled what remained of his criminal empire piece by piece, burning ledgers, destroying accounts, cutting ties with men who had once called him boss. He left behind the violence, the money, the fear, but the ghosts remained. And at the heart of it all, one last truth haunted him. The council wasn't gone. One man still remained. Alessandro Ricci, Enzo's brother, the last viper. And Alessandro had learned the truth, that the child still lived, hidden by a woman in the coastal town of St. Lucia. That evening, Luca sat in the cold light of dusk, staring at a crumpled photograph. Elena, standing by the church, holding Matteo in her arms. Marco had taken it from a distance, at Luca's request. The picture was worn now, folded at the corners, but her smile hadn't faded. He ran a finger over her face, whispering to himself, "Every time I try to walk away from you, the world drags me back." Marco entered quietly behind him, his boots crunching on the frozen dirt. "You can't keep doing this, Luca. You've burned everything. You're free." Luca shook his head. "Not yet." "You think killing Alessandro will set you free?" Marco asked. Luca's jaw tightened. "It will keep them free." Marco sighed. "You can't protect her forever. Sooner or later, she'll have to face who you were." "I know," Luca said, rising slowly. "But if I do this, she'll never have to face what I became." Matteo, now nearly 2 years old, toddled through the garden with a small wooden horse in hand, giggling as Elena chased after him. The sound filled the air like sunlight, but even laughter couldn't drown out the whisper. The townsfolk still looked at her strangely, the quiet woman who never married, who raised a child no one claimed. The name Romano still carried weight, though it was spoken less now, as if the sea itself had swallowed it. That night, Elena wrote another letter, this one short, certain. "Luca, if you're still out there, stop running. Not from them, from yourself. You've done enough fighting for 100 men. Come home. There's still a place for you, even if the world refuses to give it. We can start again. We already have." She didn't hide it in the tin box this time. She gave it to Marco when he appeared again 3 days later, his expression grave. "Find him," she said. "Give him this. Tell him we don't need a hero. We just need him alive." Marco nodded, taking the letter carefully. "I'll find him, Elena, but you should know, he's planning something final." Her heart sank. What do you mean? He hesitated. He's going after Richie. Alone. Her blood ran cold. No, he promised. Promises don't stop wars, Marco said quietly. He's doing it for you. The cause. 2 nights later, far from St. Lucia, a storm gathered over the abandoned Richie estate, the same kind of storm that had followed Luca all his life. He moved through the halls like a shadow, silent and precise, his gun steady, his heart wild. He had spent years fighting for an empire. Now he fought for a woman and a child he couldn't hold. When he reached the main chamber, Alessandro was waiting, older, leaner, his smile like a knife. Well, Alessandro drawled, if it isn't the ghost of the South. Luca stepped into the light, rain dripping from his coat. This ends tonight. Alessandro smirked. And what happens after you kill me? You think the world forgives you because you love some church girl? Luca raised the gun. No, I don't care if it forgives. I only care that it forgets you. The shot echoed like thunder. Then silence. Luca lowered the gun slowly, breathing hard. The storm outside broke open, rain pouring through shattered windows, washing blood and ash away into the dark. For the first time he didn't feel power, only emptiness. And somewhere within that emptiness, something began to heal. He met Marco near the coastal road, rain still clinging to his clothes. Marco handed him the letter. She wrote again, he said. Luca opened it slowly, his hands trembling as he wrote. The candlelight from Marco's car flickered across his face, revealing something fragile, something human breaking through the years of stone. He folded the letter, eyes shining with quiet determination. I'm going home, he said. Marco stared at him. After all, you'll be hunted again. I already was, Luca said, turning toward the road. This time I just won't hide. Something in her heart whispered, he's coming, and though she couldn't see him yet, she felt it. The storm that once tore their lives apart was finally carrying him home. The sea was restless that night. Waves broke against the shore with the force of 1,000 unspoken fears, and the wind carried whispers that made even the street lamps flicker uneasily. In the orphanage, all was still, except for Elena Moretti's heart. She couldn't sleep. Something inside her stirred, like a warning whispered from far away. It had been 2 weeks since Marco delivered the letter, 2 weeks since he'd said those impossible words. He's coming home. And yet, every night since, the same dream haunted her, the church aflame again, Matteo's cry in the dark, and Luca calling her name from somewhere she could never reach. That evening, the dream didn't wait for sleep to come. It came while she was still awake. She was sitting by the window, humming softly to Matteo, when the oil lamp flickered. The light sputtered twice, then died. Darkness filled the room. Elena, Sister Maria's voice called faintly from down the hall. The wind's blown the lamps again. I'll check the fuses, Elena said, rising carefully. She kissed Matteo's forehead. Stay here, my love. Mama will be right back. She moved through the corridor with the familiarity of someone who'd lived every inch of it. Except tonight. The walls seemed to whisper. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. Then somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. Her heart stopped. Maria, she called again. No reply. Only the wind. She took 1 step closer to the main hall, then froze. 2 silhouettes stood by the doorway. Tall, armed and familiar. One of them turned his head. She's here. She managed one desperate cry. Matteo, before a strike to her temple sent her world collapsing into black. And when she woke, her head throbbed and her hands were bound. The air was damp, metallic, the smell of gasoline and old salt. She blinked through the haze and saw she was inside an abandoned warehouse near the docks, tied to a wooden chair beneath a single flickering light. Matteo was nowhere in sight. Her voice cracked when she tried to scream. Where is he? Where's my son? From the shadows a figure stepped forward, elegant, deliberate, with eyes that gleamed like a knife. Good evening, Miss Moretti, he said smoothly. I'm afraid your son is safe only for as long as you are. Her blood ran cold. Who are you? Someone cleaning up the mess your Mafia saint left behind. He smiled faintly. My name is Alessandro Ricci. Elena's breath caught. Luca killed your brother. Ah. Alessandro nodded. Then you understand my position. She stared at him, trembling. You don't need to hurt the child. Whatever you want from me, what I want, he interrupted, is him, Romano. And I know he's coming. You see, I've studied your lover very carefully. He's predictable, when it comes to 2 things. Vengeance. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. And you. Elena's tears fell silently. He'll kill you. Alessandro laughed softly. Maybe, but not before he watches you die. The storm outside worsened, rain pounding against the corrugated roof like a war drum. Elena sat trembling, praying under her breath. Her wrists burned from the rope. The air grew colder, heavier. Then footsteps, familiar ones. Measured, heavy, and even before she saw him she knew. Luca. He stepped through the doorway, soaked and silent, his coat dripping onto the concrete. The moment his eyes found her, the rest of the room disappeared. His face went pale, a mix of fury and fear she had never seen before. Elena, he breathed, almost broke. I told you I'd keep you safe. She shook her head desperately. It's a trap, Luca, don't. But Alessandro was already behind her, gun pressed against her temple. Drop the weapon, Romano, he said, or she dies. Luca's gun wavered, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear the grind of his teeth. You let her go, he said, voice low, steady, too steady. This is between you and me. Alessandro smirked. Everything is between you and me. He motioned toward the shadow. 2 more men emerged, dragging someone forward. A small child wrapped in a blanket. Matteo. Elena screamed. No, please. The sight froze Luca where he stood. Matteo whimpered softly, reaching for her, his tiny hands trembling. Give me the boy, Alessandro said, and you can have her back. Luca's chest heaved, every breath a war. You'll let them both go. I'll think about it. Lightning flashed. For an instant, everything turned white. And then, Luca moved. It happened too fast for thought. He fired once, not at Alessandro but at the chain holding the light above. The bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Gunfire exploded in every direction. Sparks burst. Bullets ricocheted off metal. Elena ducked, feeling the heat of a shot skim past her face. Someone screamed. Someone else fell. The air filled with the smell of blood and gunpowder. A hand grabbed her arm, strong, familiar. Elena, it's me. Luca's voice rasped in her ear. Hold on. He cut the rope binding her wrists, pulling her against him. In the darkness, she felt the rapid thunder of his heartbeat against her back. He shoved Matteo into her arms. Run to the docks. Don't look back. What about you? She cried. He didn't answer. Another gun fired. Alessandro's voice shouting something guttural fury. Then, another. Then silence. Elena. By the time Elena reached the shore, dawn had begun to break, turning the sea into molten silver. Matteo clung to her shoulder, crying softly. She stumbled to a stop near the water's edge, turning back, praying, begging, that he'd appear from the smoke. For a long unbearable moment, there was nothing. And then, a figure emerged through the haze. Luca. He was limping, his shirt soaked crimson, but his eyes still burned with that same unyielding fire. Behind him, the warehouse burned, flames licking at the sky. He reached her, breath ragged, and sank to his knees in front of them. It's over, he whispered. He's gone. Elena dropped to the ground beside him, holding Matteo close and pressing her other hand to his wound. You're bleeding again, he smiled faintly. You always say that, because you always are, she said, tears spilling freely. You'll die if you keep saving us. Luca shook his head weakly. Then it's a good way to go. No, she whispered fiercely. You're not dying, not after all this. He looked at her, eyes soft despite the pain. I told you, I'd end it before it reached you. The fire crackled behind them. The sea hissed where sparks met the waves. And for a moment, amid the chaos, the ash, the ruin, there was peace. Because they were together, alive, barely, but hours later, the townsfolk would speak of the fire by the docks, of the smoke that rose like a final confession into the dawn sky. They'd say no one survived it. But Elena would know better, because as the sun climbed over the water, she saw him open his eyes again, faint, but alive, and she heard the whisper that had carried her through every storm. It's not over yet, amor mio, not until I see you in the light again. The sun broke through the storm the next morning, spilling gold over the bruised sky. The waves were gentle now, as if the sea itself had finally tired of rage. Along the coast, where fire had once devoured the night, only smoke and silence remained. But not far from the docks, hidden beneath a weathered fishing shed, Elena Moretti pressed trembling hands against Luca Romano's chest, whispering prayers between every breath. He was alive, barely. The bullet had grazed his ribs, blood soaked his shirt, but the wound wasn't fatal. Still, every heartbeat sounded like a countdown. Stay with me, she whispered for the 100th time. Please, Luca, don't let this be the end. His eyes fluttered open, weak, dazed. You should have run. I did, she said softly, tears catching in her throat. But you followed. He smiled faintly, breath uneven. Couldn't let you win that argument. She let out a small choked laugh, pressing her forehead to his.
For a moment, they simply breathed together, two souls who had run too far, fought too long, now finally still. When he woke again, it was dark. The shed was quiet, except for the rhythm of the sea. Elena sat nearby, watching the candle burn low. Matteo slept between them, his tiny fingers curled around Luca's coat sleeve. For the first time in years, Luca didn't see blood when he opened his eye. He saw home. How long, he asked, voice rasping. 2 days, Elena said. You lost a lot of blood. Sister Maria helped. She found us before dawn. The police think you're dead. He turned his head slightly toward her. You should let them keep thinking. Her eyes shimmered. And what then? You just disappear again? Hide while the world keeps calling you a monster? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward Matteo, the soft rise and fall of the boy's chest, the small innocent peace Luca had fought so hard to protect. The world will never forgive me, he said finally. Then don't ask it to, she replied. Ask me. The candlelight flickered across her face, her expression trembling between love and defiance. He wanted to tell her she deserved better, but the words wouldn't come. For once his silence wasn't from pride or guilt, it was from awe. The next morning, she led him down the path to the water. The storm had cleared completely, leaving the sea impossibly calm. The cliffs stood golden in the early light, the air smelling of salt and jasmine. This is where you found me, she said softly, bleeding, broken, ready to disappear. He looked out at the horizon. And you're still here, I told you, she said, stepping closer. I don't run. He turned to her then, the weight of every sin and scar in his eye. You should. You still can. She shook her head. I've seen worse monsters than you, Luca. And they weren't men, they were regrets. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved gently through her hair, and he reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand from her face. Her eyes closed at the touch, a quiet, wordless forgiveness. Why, he whispered. After everything I've done, why would you still choose me? Her voice trembled, but it didn't waver, because somewhere inside all that darkness, you still tried to save something good. That's all love really is, isn't it? Trying. Luca's breath hitched. He turned his face toward the sea, his throat tightening. He wasn't a man who cried, hadn't for years, but in that moment, the tears came anyway, silent, clean. Elena stepped closer, resting her hand on his cheek. You don't need to say sorry, Luca. You already did. Every time you came back. He covered her hand with his own, his voice low. If I'd met you before the blood, before the power. She smiled faintly. Then you wouldn't have been the man I fell in love with. Iteo. They stayed there for a long time, the tide rolling in and out around their feet. And when he finally knelt, not from pain, but from something far greater, surrender, Elena understood. Luca wasn't seeking absolution from God or even from her. He was forgiving himself. At last, he dipped his hand into the sea, letting the salt sting the fresh wound at his rib. Then, looking up at her, he said softly, for every life I've taken, for every sin I can't erase, I give this one back. I give myself back. She knelt with him, their hands meeting in the water, his scarred, hers steady. The sunlight caught the waves, scattering gold across their skin. It looked like grace. Iteo. That night, back at the orphanage, the three of them sat by the fire. Luca held Matteo for the first time without fear of breaking him. The boy tugged at his shirt, laughing. Luca's lips trembled into something like a smile. Elena watched them, a quiet joy rising through the ache. He knows you, she said. Luca's eyes softened. Maybe he just forgives easily. Elena leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then he takes after. He laughed, a sound so rare, so full of life. It startled even him, and for the first time he let it linger. But the peace couldn't last forever. By morning word would spread. The Ricci estate had burned, and a body presumed to be Alessandro's had been identified, but no trace of Luca Romano was found. The world still hunted his ghost, and though the sea had offered forgiveness, it hadn't yet offered freedom. Luca looked out the window as dawn rose over the horizon. He turned to Elena, who was watching him quietly. Sooner or later, he said softly, they'll come again. Elena stood, moving toward him. Then we'll face them together. He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing gently over hers. Together, he echoed. Outside, the tide whispered against the rocks, and the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm. The sea for once was calm, and in that calm, they found something rarer than peace, a reason to begin again. Morning broke too softly for the kind of pain it carried. The sky was pale blue, the kind that looks fragile, like it could shatter under the weight of one wrong memory. Somewhere far off, The church bells of St. Lucia began to ring, slow and hesitant, as though uncertain whether to mourn or to rejoice. Inside the small coastal hospital, Elena Moretti sat in a white-walled room that smelled of disinfectant and silence. The bed beside her was empty now, sheets still creased, pillows still indented. Luca Romano was gone. He had left before dawn. No goodbye, no note this time, just a single white rose lying on the table beside her, its stem wrapped with the ribbon she'd once used to bind Matteo's cradle. She stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling, her heart echoing the same word over and over again. Why? They'd taken Luca bleeding, half-conscious, shielding her and Matteo with the last of his strength after a tip-off led his enemies straight to them. When they dragged him away, he hadn't fought. He'd only looked at her, eyes calm despite the chaos, and said, "Promise me you'll keep living, even if I don't make it back." Those were his last words to her. Until today, when she woke up in the hospital, the police guard gone and the bed empty.
Sister Maria entered quietly, her face lined with both relief and sorrow. "They found his room empty at sunrise," she said. "No one saw him leave. The doctors say he was strong enough to walk, but not for long." Elena's voice shook. "Maybe he'll die out there." The nun sat beside her, clasping her hand. "Maybe not. Maybe he's already somewhere better than this." Elena shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "He's running again, sister. He can't stop running." "Then pray he's running towards something this time," the nun said gently, "not away." To gain. That evening, when visiting hours ended and the hospital grew quiet, Elena walked to the window at the end of the corridor. The view stretched across the coast, the sea black and still, the lights of fishing boats glimmering faintly like stars that had fallen too low. She pressed her hand to the cold glass. The wind outside howled faintly, carrying the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. She thought of him somewhere out there in the dark, walking roads only ghosts remembered, his body broken, his soul burning with too much love and too little peace. She wondered if he was watching the same sea, thinking the same thoughts, whispering her name to the wind. 2 weeks passed. The newspapers wrote of him again. Mafia ghost escapes police custody. Romano believed dead after cliff car chase. The photograph was blurry. A crashed patrol car, flames, no body recover. Sister Maria folded the paper and said softly, "Maybe this is his ending." But Elena only shook her head. "No, not him. He's like the tide. He goes missing, but he always comes back." The orphanage was rebuilt, the children's laughter filling its hallways again. Matteo grew taller, stronger, his eyes so like his father's that sometimes Elena couldn't look at him without feeling her heart break and mend at the same time. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Matteo toddled into the chapel, holding something in his small hand. "Mama," he said, "a man gave me this." Elena frowned, drying her hands. "What man, sweetheart?" He pointed toward the open door. The courtyard beyond was empty, only shadows and light. She looked down at what he held, a folded piece of paper, edges damp with sea air. Her breath caught when she recognized the handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, the ink faint but familiar. "Elena, the world still won't forgive me." "That's fine. I never asked it to, but you did something it never could. You made me human again. I can't stay, not yet. I'm being hunted, but for the first time, I'm not afraid, because I know what peace looks like, and it has your face." "Tell Matteo," his father finally learned to breathe without violence. "Tell him he'll know when I'm home, because the sea will be calm that day." Elena, her hands trembled. The tears came before she could stop them. She pressed the note to her heart, the scent of salt and ink filling her lungs. Outside, the wind shifted, gentle this time, almost tender. The waves no longer crashed. They lapped softly against the shore, a lullaby instead of a warning. And for the first time since that night in the church, Elena smiled through her tears. Later that evening, as she stood by the window of the hospital where she had last seen him, she whispered to the horizon, "If you can hear me, come home when you're ready. We'll be waiting." And somewhere, maybe across the sea, maybe just beyond the wind, a man stood in the shadow of a harbor, a small pendant glinting at his neck. He smiled faintly, whispering back to the waves, It had been nearly a year since that last letter, a year of rebuilding, of learning to live inside the quiet that Luca left behind. The town of St. Lucia had changed. It had grown brighter, louder, more alive. Children filled the orphanage gardens again, the markets sang with laughter, and the church that once burned stood renewed, stone polished, glass restored, bells ringing like they remembered how to hope. But Elena Moretti still kept one candle burning. Every evening at dusk, she lit it in the back pew of St. Lucia's church. The same place where a wounded man once walked in carrying a crying child. The same place where she had learned that even the most broken souls could be beautiful. She never missed a night. It wasn't habit, it was faith. In him, lanterns floated in the sky, laughter echoed through the streets, and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifted from the square. Elena sat in the church, away from it all. The candle's light flickered against her face as she whispered her prayer. Wherever you are, Luca, may the darkness finally leave you. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind push softly against the stained glass windows. The air shifted then, subtly, like a breath she didn't. Somewhere behind her, the door creaked open. She didn't turn. The church had visitors often during festival nights, travelers seeking quiet, the lost seeking peace. She simply bowed her head lower, her whisper steady. Then a voice spoke from the shadows. It's strange, isn't it, how a man can live with so much sin, and still believe that light would let him in. Her blood froze. That voice, low, rough, impossible. Elena's eyes snapped open. She turned slowly, her heart trembling like a bird inside her chest. The voice had come from the confessional booth. The curtain was half drawn. She stood, every part of her wanting to believe and not believe at once, and walked toward it. Who's there? She whispered. Silence. Then, I came to confess. Her breath caught. She knew that calm, broken steadiness she had heard once in the dark. Tears filled her eyes before her mind could stop them. Confess what? She asked, barely breathing. For every sin I've committed, the voice said quietly. For every man I buried, every promise I broke, for every night I ran from what I loved because I didn't believe I deserved to stay. Her knees weakened. She pressed her hand against the wood of the confessional, trembling. Luca, I can't be forgiven, he said, but I thought I should try. For her sake. She laughed softly through her tears, that kind of laugh that hurts more than crying. She would say you were already forgiven. The curtain moved, slowly, and then he stepped out. There were new scars, faint gray at his temples, a kind of weariness that no sleep could erase. But his eyes, those dark, restless eyes, were still the same. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The candlelight between them flickered like the pulse of something divine. You came back, she whispered. He smiled faintly. I never really left. I just needed to learn how to walk toward you instead of away. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his face, stopping inches away as if she was afraid he'd vanish. You're real, she said, the words breaking like glass. You're really here. He took her hand then, pressing it gently to his cheek. You said I'd know when it was time to come home, when the sea was calm. Her tears spilled over. And was it? He nodded, eyes glistening. For the first time in my life. They stood there in the quiet church, the bells outside echoing through the open door. He looked around at the candles, the repaired altar, the soft light painting her in gold and shadow. I used to think God had turned his back on me, he said softly, but maybe he was just waiting for me to walk into this place again without a gun. She smiled through her tears. And what will you do now? He exhaled, his hand still holding hers. Whatever you let him. And laughed, a sound like the first song after a long silence. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. The air between them felt like prayer, not words, not forgiveness, just presence. I kept the candle burning, she whispered, every night, for you. He smiled. Then I guess I finally followed the light home. The light. Later, when the last of the festival music faded, and only the sea's voice remained, they walked together down the steps of the church. The moon hung over the water like an old witness. Luca stopped, looking out at the horizon. You know they'll still be looking for me. The past doesn't just disappear. Elena slipped her arm around his. Then let it find us together. He looked down at her, eyes soft with something that could only be peace. Together, he said again, a promise this time, not a plea. And as they walked toward the orphanage, the candle inside the church flickered once, then steadied its flame, glowing bright and unwavering. Morning came quietly, the kind of golden, forgiving morning that feels like the world itself has exhaled. The sea stretched out like glass, calm and endless. The gulls wheeled in lazy arcs above the cliffs, their cries blending with the soft toll of St. Lucia's church bell. And in that light, Elena Moretti stood by the window of the orphanage, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold, watching the waves roll and retreat. For the first time in years, her heart wasn't waiting, it was resting. Behind her, laughter drifted from the courtyard, children running, the sound of Matteo's voice rising above them all. His laughter was bright and free, like the world had forgotten how close it had come to losing him. She smiled. He was almost 3 now, brave, calm. Everything she had prayed his father would live to see. And he had. The blossom. Luca Romano walked into the sunlight from the far end of the courtyard. He no longer looked like a man built of violence. The scars remained, but they had softened, no longer warnings, but his hair had grown longer, touched with gray, and his clothes were plain. He looked ordinary, and that was his greatest miracle. Matteo ran to him, wooden horse clutched in his little hands. "Papa!" Luca bent down, catching him in his arms. His eyes closed for a moment, the sound of that word sinking deep into the places inside him that had never known peace. "Slow down, Piccolo," he murmured with a grin. "You'll fly away if you keep running like that." Elena watched them from the window, her smile trembling between joy and disbelief. Every time she saw them together, it felt like rewriting the laws of heaven, proof that mercy still existed for those who least believed they deserved it. Later that morning, they walked together along the seaside path, where the cliffs dropped away to turquoise water. The town was quiet now, the noise of the festival had faded, leaving only the murmur of waves and the wind through olive trees. Luca carried Matteo on his shoulders while Elena walked beside them, her shawl trailing lightly in the breeze. "You could have gone anywhere," she said softly. "Started over somewhere new." "I did," he replied, glancing at her. "Right here." She smiled, shaking her head. "You really think the world will just forget? Let it remember," he said. "The man they're looking for doesn't exist anymore." He looked at her then, really looked as if memorizing every detail of her face. "You were the only thing I ever wanted to protect that didn't need protecting." Her steps faltered. "And what are you protecting now?" He stopped walking, the boy's laughter fading into the wind. "Peace," he said simply. "Ours." He's looked out toward the sea. "I've spent my life taking things from the world. Maybe now I can give something back." The rebuilt altar glowed softly in the light, a single candle burning beside a white rose. Elena reached for Luca's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, like they'd done it all their lives. She looked at him and saw everything he'd become, not the man who once ruled through fear, but the one who'd learned how to live without it. "Do you still pray?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Every day." "For what?" He smiled faintly. "For more time to deserve what I've been given." She leaned against him, her voice a whisper. "You already do." The sky was clear. Thousands of pinpricks of light spread across the horizon like pieces of something once broken, now whole again. Luca watched the sea glimmer in the moonlight. "When I was a boy," he said softly, "I used to think peace was a lie people told themselves, something that only existed in stories." "And now?" Elena asked. He turned to her, eyes gentle. "Now I know it's something you have to fight for, and something you can lose in an instant if you forget why you wanted it." She smiled. "And why did you want?" He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing across her skin. "Because of you." There was no need for words. They had both said enough in blood, in tears, in every choice that had led them here. Finally, Elena spoke. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Luca exhaled slowly. "Sometimes, but I've learned not to plan too far ahead. Life isn't a straight road, Elena. It's a circle. We just keep finding the same hearts again and again until we learn what love really means." She smiled, eyes closing. "And what does it mean?" He looked out toward the horizon where sea met sky, where light met shadow. "It means that even after everything ends, something still begins." Elena lifted her gaze to him, her voice soft as a prayer. "You found your way home." He looked at her, his smile gentle. "Certain." "No," he said. "You were." Years later the people of St. Lucia would still tell their story, the woman who prayed in the church and the stranger who came carrying a child. Some said he was a sinner, some said he was a ghost, but those who truly knew them would smile and say softly, "No, he was a man who finally learned to love," and she was the reason the light never went out. And somewhere, beyond the sea, the wind would carry the echo of that truth, tender, eternal, unbroken, and somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.